What if I told you Albert Einstein's views on the afterlife were kept hidden for nearly 100 years? You may know him for his groundbreaking work on the universe, time, and space. But what if his greatest discovery had nothing to do with science at all? What if it was something far more personal? Stay with me. This isn't just another lecture on physics, it's a journey into the unknown, and you're about to hear what the world wasn't meant to know. In 1931, Einstein wasn't just a genius. He was a luminary, a mind that pierced the very fabric of reality. But what if there was more to his brilliance than equations and relativity? What if his most profound truth had nothing to do with the laws of physics? What most people don't realize about Einstein, though, is that in private, Einstein was questioning far deeper mysteries, questions about the afterlife, the soul, and the very nature of existence. In that year, he sat down with a German journalist, Friedrich Faulkner, in what was supposed to be a quiet, private conversation. But this wasn't about galaxies or time itself. This was about what happens after we die. Imagine if this conversation had been recorded in full, shared with the world. Would it have changed everything you thought you knew about life and death? The mainstream would dismiss it as a fleeting philosophical musing. But here's the truth. The conversation was so radical, so dangerous, that it was erased from history, locked away, buried, hidden in plain sight. What you're about to hear will lift the veil, revealing truths that were meant to stay in the dark. What was suppressed for so long has resurfaced, and now you're about to uncover the awakening that changed everything. The conversation, never formally published, exists today only in fragments. But what remains is enough to raise uncomfortable questions. A line from the transcript, omitted from all mainstream biographies, reads, "Consciousness may not emerge from matter, but return to it." Not a theory, but a belief quietly held and carefully concealed. Einstein once described what he called a persistent resonance. Not a soul exactly, but something that doesn't fade with death. A frequency, a continuity, an echo of awareness that endures after the body stops working. Imagine if your thoughts aren't generated by your brain but channeled through it. Imagine if death isn't a wall but a filter, and what passes through is still you, just no longer bound to matter. He stopped short of dogma. He refused mysticism. But he saw patterns, consistencies in human experience that conventional science couldn't explain. Sensations felt at the edge of sleep. Dreams that seemed older than memory. The common thread in near-death accounts that couldn't be dismissed as coincidence. In the quiet of his private reflections, Einstein's thoughts on consciousness linger, almost unnoticed. What if consciousness wasn't the product of matter, but something that preceded it, or perhaps something that would return to it? This notion was never openly spoken, never part of his public persona, but it was there, buried beneath the surface of his ideas, hinted at in fragments, as if he himself knew the implications were too great for the world to bear. A persistent resonance, he once suggested, might survive the body's decay. The body, in its death, would fade, but something deeper, something fundamental, would remain. A truth waiting to be understood. That portion of the transcript, according to archived correspondences between Faulkner and his publisher, was removed during editing. Officially, it was deemed philosophically inconsistent with Einstein's public work. The publisher never printed it. Faulkner never spoke of it again. But the redacted notes remained, and so did the questions. Why redact a discussion about consciousness, unless it threatened a larger narrative, why suppress it, unless there was something there? Think about that. Why are you taught that consciousness is chemical, that thought ends with the body, when one of the greatest minds in history quietly suspected otherwise? And, more importantly, what if he was right? Because if consciousness returns to matter, not born of it, but returning, then you are not your brain. You are not your history. You are not your thoughts. You are the resonance. And if that resonance persists, then death is not disappearance. It is transformation. Ask yourself, what part of you feels older than your years? What dreams have returned to you, over and over, as if they remember you? And what if those flashes of déjà vu weren't errors, but echoes? This wasn't a theory Einstein ever published, but it was a truth he hinted at quietly, carefully. And if you've felt that resonance, even once, you already know. This is only the first crack in the wall. There is more, much more, and what comes next has been hidden far longer. You've been taught that the material world is all that exists, that what you see, feel, and touch defines reality. But this may only be a fraction of something far greater, something beyond what you can comprehend. Science, for all its brilliance, might only be fingering the hem of a deeper garment, as Einstein put it. The truths we rely on, the ones that shape our lives, could be just a glimpse of a much larger hidden reality. Einstein's words were not just those of a scientist, they were the reflections of a man who saw the limits of materialism and the shadows of something far more expansive. A truth that most people could not even imagine, let alone understand. The deeper fabric of being, what Einstein was hinting at, is something beyond the physical realm. It's a resonance, a vibration that transcends time and matter. For Einstein, this wasn't some abstract idea or philosophical musings. He was grappling with something real. He spoke of this persistent resonance, the kind of vibration that survives beyond the physical body. Imagine the echoes of your soul, not bound by death, but continuing long after the body fades. Think about it. You know the world around you. You know the limits of what you can see, hear, and measure. But how much of it do you really understand? What if there's an unseen current, a force, an energy that shapes everything, from the atoms in your body to the stars in the sky? What if that is what Einstein was pointing to? A truth that doesn't fit into any equation. What if, just maybe, the answers Einstein was uncovering weren't meant for everyone? What if the mainstream scientific world, a world obsessed with facts, with what can be proven, wasn't prepared for this kind of knowledge? There are those who believe these profound truths were intentionally suppressed, buried, and forgotten, hidden from the eyes of ordinary people. This knowledge, once guarded, is starting to resurface. The veil that has obscured it is slowly being lifted. But what does that mean for you, for the way you view life, the universe, and your own existence? If you could see beyond the curtain, if you could tap into that resonance Einstein spoke of, how would it change the way you experience the world? Einstein's admission wasn't just a curiosity. It wasn't a fleeting philosophical thought. It was the realization of something profound, something life-altering. The veil he spoke of, the curtain between what we see and what truly is not just a poetic metaphor. It is a boundary between the material and the spiritual, between what we understand and what lies beyond. Now, consider this. If this knowledge was too dangerous to be revealed back then, is it safe for you to know now? You might be wondering, why is this knowledge only resurfacing now? What truths were kept hidden, And what might you be unlocking by understanding what Einstein understood? What if the truth he was whispering about could change your life forever? The veil, Einstein said, is thin. And now, just maybe, it's time for you to see beyond it. The resonance he spoke of is not a far-off concept. It's waiting for you to recognize it, to feel it, to awaken to it. What if this awakening is just the beginning? You've heard that nothing moves faster than light, that the speed limit of the universe is absolute. But that's only true if you believe consciousness is bound by the same rules as matter. Einstein began questioning that boundary in private, not in equations or theorems, but in thought experiments he never dared publish. In a restricted memo to Faulkner, one the public never saw, he described an idea so radical it bordered on spiritual treason. The soul as an energetic imprint. Not metaphorically, literally. An imprint not made of matter, but motion. He proposed that when a person dies, something remains. Not in a sentimental sense, but as a high-frequency pattern that doesn't decay, because it doesn't exist within conventional space-time. It exists beyond it, outside the curve. Not many people know this, but Einstein studied ancient Sanskrit texts during his correspondence with Indian philosophers. He was struck by the concept of prana, not just breath, but a current of life energy. He began to wonder, could consciousness behave like an untraceable current? One that doesn't die with the brain but departs, leaving behind echoes? That word, echo, appears multiple times in Faulkner's draft transcript. Einstein speculated that the flashes people described during near-death experiences weren't hallucinations, but gravitational feedback, like the sound of something powerful moving through another layer of existence, just outside our field of perception. You've heard stories like that, people floating above their bodies, seeing lights, hearing voices they can't explain. The mainstream dismisses them always, but Einstein didn't. He considered the possibility that those experiences weren't just real, but evidence. He described them as intersections, moments where the boundary between two realities thins, just enough for you to catch a glimpse. Like a ripple in the surface of still water, like hearing music you can't trace to any source. And the most unsettling part is that he believed these energy signatures leave behind a measurable tension. Not electromagnetic, not gravitational. Something new, something unnamed. He theorized that this tension could explain the sensation of presence many feel long after a person has died. It's why certain rooms feel full even when they're empty. Why certain places carry silence that hums. It wasn't romantic, it was physics, but a kind of physics that required a paradigm we aren't allowed to explore. Because if we did, we'd have to admit that you are not simply your body. You are not your neurons. You are not the accident of chemistry and chance. You are a persistent resonance, a vibrational imprint, existing beyond what light can reach. And here's what almost no one knows. Einstein hinted very briefly in a private letter that under extremely specific conditions, these imprints could return, re-enter observable reality, not as ghosts, but as patterns seeking expression, energy looking for a vessel. What conditions? He never said. Only that they involved gravitational thresholds and geometric alignments we haven't yet discovered. But you can feel it, can't you? That nagging sensation that something's just behind the veil watching, waiting. You've dismissed it before. You were told it's just imagination, but the person who redefined reality didn't think it was imaginary. He thought it was evidence, and if he was right, if consciousness leaves behind a trace, then death is not silence. It's static, a lingering frequency waiting to be heard again. But most people will never hear it because they weren't taught to listen, but you were. They say Einstein never stopped questioning the architecture of reality. But there's one line, scribbled in the margin of a private letter in 1933, that remains almost entirely absent from public discourse. It reads, "The brain is not the source, it is the interpreter." This wasn't a theoretical flourish. He was referring to something he'd begun observing quietly, almost reluctantly. Patterns of cognition that didn't align with cause and effect. Bursts of insight that felt received, not generated. To him, the implications were disturbing and exhilarating. The mind, your mind, might not live inside you. Instead, what you experience as thought could be a transmission, filtered through flesh, not born from it. A decoding mechanism, a biological radio, not a factory, but a tuner. And if that's true, then death, the shutting down of the body, might not end consciousness. It might only change the frequency. Now ask yourself, if your thoughts aren't fully yours, where do they come from? And more importantly, who else might be receiving? Einstein referred to it as a consciousness already in the field. A layer of reality modern instruments still struggle to detect. But he wasn't alone. Privately, he exchanged theories with scientists who'd witnessed inexplicable phenomena, cases of thought transfer, dream synchronicity, even moments where two minds seemed to share a space. No formal paper was ever published. Not one. Why? Because the implications were too radical. They undermined the materialist model, and that's something the scientific gatekeepers were never going to allow. So the idea was buried. The field, the one beyond the senses, was silenced, but remnants remain. Letters never cited. Notebooks marked only in pencil. Phrases like, "The veil is electrical." We tune what we mistake for self. Perception is resonance. You may think these are poetic abstractions, but they're not. They're evidence, and if they're right, you've never had an original thought. You've only ever caught one. Like lightning, the mind strikes where it finds the clearest path, and sometimes, rarely, it reveals the truth behind the current. The question is, have you ever paused long enough to trace the static back to its source? There is one entry buried deep in a lesser-known personal notebook from 1934 that scholars still avoid quoting in full. 6 words scribbled in slanted graphite off to the corner of a page filled with calculations. It was not a hallucination. It was instruction. No further context, no formula attached. But those 6 words never referenced in Einstein's formal papers appear again in the margin of an unsent letter found years later, locked in a private cabinet that hadn't been opened since before the war. In it, Einstein alluded to a moment he described only as a convergence, not a dream, not an illusion, something deeper, thicker, like slipping through a seam in the fabric of reality. In this state, he encountered a figure he recognized without introduction, Baruch Spinoza. Not as a statue, not as an idea, but as a presence. What followed, according to the letter, was not a conversation but a direct infusion of understanding. No audible voice, just concepts, pressed into awareness. He wrote that he saw existence not as a line or a sphere, but as an indivisible field, pulsing with intelligence. a unity between self and cosmos, between essence and extension. He referred to it as substance seeing itself. That phrase never appeared in any published document. And yet, those who've quietly reviewed the original notebook say the handwriting is unmistakably his. What's more unsettling is what he noted after that. The mind is not housed in the body is housed in the field. You were never meant to hear that line. It was crossed out in ink before the page was torn and replaced. For decades, biographers dismissed these entries as a tired man's poetic wanderings. Some suggested he was slipping. Others claimed he had become too mystical, too speculative. But what most people don't realize is that those pages were deliberately excluded from the official Einstein archives. A full 12 pages omitted from the Zurich collection, citing lack of scientific relevance. 12 pages. One of them included a sketch, rudimentary, of a spiral flowing inward. Not outward like a galaxy, but inward, toward a point beyond form. The scribbled label underneath read, "Instruction begins where identity ends." Can you imagine the implications if that had been published? Can you imagine what it means that a man celebrated for his logic, his mathematics, and his disbelief in superstition left behind a record not of speculation but of transmission? You have to ask, why were these entries hidden? Why did so many fight to keep this side of Einstein in the dark? And, more importantly, what truth did Spinoza really pass on that night? Because according to Einstein, it wasn't a vision. It wasn't imagination. It was a message, and it was never meant for him alone. And what you're about to learn might make you question everything you think you know about reality. There's a page torn clean from its binding that resurfaced not in a lab or archive, but through an anonymous auction house in Geneva. It contained no formulas, just 4 ancient letters. Y, H, W, H. And beneath them, one sentence, written not in German but Latin. Via inversa est reditus. The reversed path is the return. Whoever handled that page before it vanished again claimed Einstein referred to this as not religion but physics beyond time. Not a metaphor, not mysticism, but something else. A pattern. Recursive, self-folding. A loop. One that begins not at birth, but far before, and ends not in death but in return. He never spoke the name aloud. He whispered it once, they say, during an interview that was never broadcast. Not because the tape was lost, but because it was locked away by the institution that funded it. Those who were in the room said his voice changed, slower, sharper, as if measuring each syllable not by language, but by frequency. And then he said it. YHWH. Reversed is the return path. You weren't supposed to hear that. Even now, you'll find no official transcript, no public mention. Just a footnote in a private academic letter where one physicist admitted he believed symmetry hid something older than light. You have to ask yourself, what did he see? Why that name? Why that phrasing? And what does it mean to describe the most sacred sequence in human language as a path, not a title? Einstein wasn't religious, at least not publicly, but this wasn't about worship, this was about structure. And the Tetragrammaton? He called it a mirror equation, one that didn't just explain matter, but explained return. To those willing to see, it was a map hidden in sound. To others, it was blasphemy disguised as theory. That's why it was buried. Because if the divine name isn't a relic of belief, but a cipher of energetic recurrence, then nothing you've been told about death or life is complete. And if Einstein saw it not as theology but as architecture, you're not just a person, you're a resonance walking backward toward its origin. Most people will dismiss this. They'll say it's poetic nonsense. They'll cling to what's safe, what's ordinary. But for those who see the veil not as metaphor but as membrane, this is where things begin to shift. This is where physics becomes a pilgrimage, and this, right here, is where the final veil begins to lift. There's another sentence that has been erased. The last lines of the transcript, redacted in every known copy, hidden from view. Why? What was so dangerous about those final words? You may have heard whispers about what they might have said. Some claim the final lines read, "If humanity knew what I saw, we would stop fearing death, but also stop obeying." Imagine, for a moment, that the forbidden sentence holds the key to everything: life, death, and the forces that govern them. It's so simple, so clear, yet so terrifying that it's been hidden from you, hidden from the masses. Why? Because it holds the potential to change everything. The truth is, we don't fear death because it's the end. We fear it because it's the beginning of something beyond our control. It's not the final frontier we've been led to believe. It's a doorway to a deeper truth, one that could shake the very foundation of how we live. And then there's the second part, the one that speaks of disobedience, the idea that we obey because we're taught to, that this obedience is ingrained in us, suffocating us, keeping us small. But this truth, this forbidden sentence, reveals the reason behind it. The knowledge we've been kept from, the knowledge that could set us free, shows us that the chains we've been bound by were never necessary. This knowledge, hidden from us, could unlock a way to break free from it all. The truth, suppressed by those in power, is not just a matter of life or death. It's about control. Control over what you fear. Control over what you understand. The very structures that keep you in line could crumble with a single understanding. But these words, this forbidden sentence, aren't meant to be understood by just anyone. They are for those who can see beyond the veil, who dare to question, who are ready to understand the implications of this knowledge. What if what they saw didn't just change their understanding of death, but their understanding of the system that rules their lives? Imagine the weight of that knowledge. You've been taught to obey, to fear, to conform. But what if the key to your freedom lies in rejecting all of that? What if it's not just about facing death, but breaking free from the chains that bind your mind? There's something else, something that's been whispered about, but never fully exposed. A Swiss researcher, working in secret, leaked a memo that would shake the foundations of everything you've been told. It's about that very forbidden sentence, the one redacted in all known copies of the transcript. The memo confirms its existence. But here's where it gets even more chilling. The researcher went a step further. He had the paper stock analyzed, carbon dated, and the results? They match up perfectly with the timeline. The final sentence is real. It's not just a rumor, not just a myth. It exists. And now, those who know the truth are left to wonder, why was this sentence hidden? What could be so dangerous about it that a whole community of people, from researchers to the highest authorities, would go to such lengths to keep it buried? You've been kept in the dark for so long. But now, the evidence is clear. The forbidden sentence isn't just an idea. It's something that could change everything you thought you knew. Consciousness isn't something you generate. It's something you access, a deeper, universal truth that exists beyond the confines of the mind. Death isn't the end, but a realignment. It's the soul unfolding into another layer of existence, just beyond the veil of what we know. Modern science avoids the soul, dismissing it as irrelevant. Yet, quantum physics constantly brushes up against it, hinting at something far greater than we've ever understood. Much of what you believe isn't truly yours. It was decided for you long before you ever had a chance to choose. If this is true, you will never see life or death the same way again. As you stand at the edge of what you know, looking into the abyss of what lies beyond, you realize that everything you've been told, everything you've believed about the world, about your place in it, has been shaped by forces far greater than yourself. Forces that were set in motion long before you ever took your first breath. And, as you peer deeper into this abyss, the boundaries between what you think is real and what could be true begin to blur, and you start to wonder if all of this, the material world, the very structure of reality itself, is just a thin veil, a curtain that hides a far greater truth, one that we can't even begin to comprehend with our limited minds. And as you contemplate the possibility that consciousness may not be a product of the brain, but instead something that exists outside of time and space, you feel a stirring deep within you, a sense that everything you've known is about to be shattered, and you realize that in this moment, this fleeting moment, you are standing on the threshold of an awakening that could forever change the way you see yourself, the world, and everything that has ever been.